Slay the Spire 2 is finally here, which means it's time to shuffle up, hoard your potions like a gremlin, and blame every bad decision on RNG. If you're new, don't worry. This game is all about climbing a brutal dungeon with a deck of cards and slowly turning your janky starter build into something completely broken. You've got 5 heroes to choose from, and each one plays wildly differently. Today, we're talking about my personal favorite, the Silent. If you like fast turns, clever combos, and watching enemies slowly melt from poison while you sit back and smile, you're in the right place. Now, fair warning, the Silent isn't exactly the smash everything with a sword type. She's more about finesse. You'll be cycling through multiple cards per turn, stacking poison, setting up synergies, and sometimes surviving by the skin of your teeth with well-timed defense. She can feel a little tricky at first, especially if you're brand new to the series, but once it clicks, she's insanely satisfying. So in this beginner's guide, I'm going to break down how to approach the Silent, what to focus on early, and how to start building decks that actually carry you through the climb instead of leaving you face down on floor 3. Let's get into it. I'm quickly moving on to the video. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. One of the biggest mistakes new players make with the Silent in Slay The Spire 2 is trying to pick every strong looking card instead of committing to a clear plan. With her, direction is everything. You really want to understand her 3 main archetypes early on: poison, draw and discard, and Shivs. When you recognize which path your early cards and relics are nudging you toward, your runs start to feel way more controlled and way less chaotic. Let's talk about poison first, because this is usually the most straightforward for beginners. Poison does exactly what it sounds like. You stack it on enemies, and at the start of their turn, they take damage equal to their current poison stacks. Then it ticks down by 1. So if an enemy has 20 poison, they take 20 damage, then it drops to 19. Poison builds are amazing for scaling. Instead of trying to burst enemies down instantly, you slowly turn them into walking time bombs. Combine this with block cards and weak effects, and you can just sit back and watch bosses melt. Then there is the draw and discard archetype, which revolves around the Sly mechanic. Sly allows you to cast a card for free if you discard it. That is where things get crazy. Suddenly, energy becomes less of a limitation, and you can chain together turns that feel completely unfair. When you start adding cards that reward you for drawing, like Speedster, your turns can explode out of nowhere. This archetype feels a bit more advanced, but once it clicks, you start playing half your deck in a single turn and wondering how it all even happened. Now let's talk about Shivs. Shivs are 0 cost cards that deal 4 damage and are exhausted after you use them. That means they do not go back into your deck when you reshuffle. Shiv decks are all about burst damage. You generate a huge number of Shivs and unload them in one massive turn. It feels fast, aggressive, and very satisfying. The key is stacking effects that benefit from playing lots of cards in one turn, because suddenly those tiny 4 damage hits add up to something devastating. And do not forget, the Silent is not just about offense. She has surprisingly strong defensive tools. She can apply weak to reduce incoming damage, and she has plenty of solid block cards. You usually do not build an entire deck around pure defense, but mixing block with poison is incredibly effective. You stall, you defend, you weaken enemies, and you let the toxins do their work. Once you understand how these pieces fit together, the Silent stops feeling fragile and starts feeling like one of the smartest, most controlled characters in Slay the Spire 2. If we are ranking the Silent's archetypes for beginners, Poison is easily the most beginner-friendly and honestly one of the strongest overall. Compared to Draw and Discard or Shiv builds, which require very tight sequencing and careful planning, Poison is much more straightforward. You apply it, you protect yourself, and you let the damage stack up over time. It is simple to understand, but incredibly powerful when built correctly. Your first goal in a poison run is stacking it consistently. Cards like Poison Stab, Deadly Poison, Snake Bite, and Envenom are your foundation. Once an enemy is poisoned, the game plan shifts. Now you want cards that either increase those poison stacks or amplify the value you get from them. That is where cards like Accelerant, Bubble, and Mirage really shine. They turn a steady, damage over time strategy into something that scales out of control. Accelerant is especially absurd in this archetype. Triggering your poison damage twice can completely shred an enemy's health bar, especially against bosses with large pools of health. Outbreak is another fantastic closer because hitting that 11 damage threshold for its effect is surprisingly easy once you are stacking poison consistently, and Mirage gives you breathing room, adding survivability and often generating a massive amount of block in a single turn, but you can safely stall while the toxins do their work. If you are just starting out with the Silent in Slay the Spire 2, leaning into poison early is usually the safest bet. It helps you stabilize your runs, clear encounters more reliably, and build confidence with the character. Once you understand how poison scaling works, branching into more complex archetypes becomes much easier. One thing you will notice pretty quickly is that the Silent is not an explosive early game character. She is more of a slow starter. It usually takes a handful of key cards before she can deal massive damage in a single turn, especially compared to more straightforward damage-focused characters. Because of that, your early fights should be approached a bit more carefully. Play defensively, value block highly, and do not be afraid to take slightly longer combats if it means preserving your health. At the same time, you actually want to take regular fights on the map. The more enemies you defeat, the more card rewards you see, and the faster your deck starts to come together. She also rewards commitment more than hesitation. While this advice technically applies to every character in Slay the Spire 2, it is especially important for the Silent. Her power comes from synergy. If you split your focus between poison, shivs, and draw and discard without fully committing, your deck will feel weak and unfocused. Pick a direction early based on your first few rewards and relics, then double down. Once her synergies are online, she transforms from fragile and slow into one of the most calculated and deadly characters in the game, capable of dismantling elite and boss encounters with surprising control. A lot of newer players tunnel vision on the main damage archetypes and completely overlook the Silent support cards. That is a mistake. She becomes truly powerful when you start weaving in her skill and power cards that revolve around block, dexterity, and debuffing enemies. Cards like Dash, Blur, Shadow Meld, and After Image might not look flashy on their own, but they give her the defensive backbone she needs to survive long enough for her scaling to take over. The real magic happens when you combine these defensive tools with your main archetype. Take After Image in a Shiv deck, for example. After Image gives you 1 block every time you play a card. Shivs cost 0 energy, which means you can flood the board with them. Suddenly, every tiny blade you throw is not just damage, it is also free defense. You end up dealing burst damage while stacking an absurd amount of block in the same turn. That is when the deck starts to feel unfair. She is also excellent at applying debuffs like Vulnerable and Weak, and that opens the door for some explosive turns. Vulnerable increases the damage enemies take, which pairs beautifully with her draw-based damage cards. Assassinate is a perfect example. It costs 0 energy and has Innate, meaning it always starts in your opening hand. That kind of guaranteed burst can immediately swing an encounter in your favor. And then there is Grand Finale. It requires specific setup, but when you line it up correctly against a vulnerable target, the damage output is almost ridiculous. So yes, you absolutely want to focus on getting your core poison, shiv, or draw and discard engine online, but do not ignore these support tools. Leaving room in your deck for a few well-chosen defensive or debuff cards can be the difference between barely surviving an elite fight and completely dominating it. With the Silent, smart layering of support and synergy is what separates a decent run from a truly broken one. Potions are one of those small details that separate average runs from great ones in Slay the Spire 2. With the Silent especially, the right potion at the right time can completely flip a difficult fight. Early on, you will mostly see common and uncommon potions, and there are a few that fit her kit perfectly. Weak Potion, Dexterity Potion, Vulnerable Potion, and Swift Potion are all fantastic pickups. They either enhance her defensive control or amplify her burst potential, which is exactly what she wants. Weak Potion is particularly strong if you are running cards like Tracking, since it doubles the damage dealt to enemies affected by weak. That kind of synergy can turn a simple debuff into a lethal setup tool. Swift Potion is also incredibly valuable because card draw is always useful for the Silent, whether you are playing poison, shivs, or a draw and discard build, and do not be afraid to use these. You do not need to hoard potions for the entire map. Preserving health in early and mid-floor fights is often more important than saving everything for a single boss. When it comes to uncommon potions, keep an eye out for Potion of Binding, Gambler's Brew, Duplicator, and Fortifier. Potion of Binding is excellent for weakening multiple enemies at once, giving you breathing room in multi-target fights. Gambler's Brew can be absurd in a deck filled with Sly cards, letting you cycle aggressively for explosive turns. Duplicator is strong on any character, copying your most important card at the perfect moment. And Fortifier is a lifesaver if your deck is a little light on block. Smart potion management will not carry a bad deck, but it will absolutely elevate a good one into something capable of handling elite and boss encounters with confidence. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.